Hello, everyone. I'm Dimitrije.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Dimitrije Milić, the program director of the New Third Way think tank from Belgrade. Welcome to our new event, first one after the summer break. Thank you all for participation, especially during this vacation season, because it's really hard to mobilize people for any online event during the summer. So I'm sure that the topic is interesting, and that is probably the main reason why we have a relatively solid participation rate. And I'm sure that our speakers from two different parts of the world have interesting insights for this topic that is probably one of the most important topics now, and it will be probably in the next 10 to 15 years. And I'm sure that this is not the first, this is the first but not the last event on this topic from our organization. I will not take any more time from you. I will give the floor to my colleague Dragoslav Rašeta to introduce you with the speakers and to say a little bit more about the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitrije, and thank you all for joining us today. We will be discussing China's soft power primarily, its reach and scope, its main objectives, difference between China's more mainstream and traditional approach, characteristic for the Southeast Asia, so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, and its differences to a more subtle, more timid, more stealthier approach to China-Serbia relationship. So before we start with the event, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers for today. We have Dr. Igor Novakovic of the INDSR Fund from Serbia. Good afternoon, Mr. Novakovic.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for showing up today. And we have Dr. Yiso Zhang from the Institute for National Defense and Security Research joining us from Taiwan. Good evening, Mr. Zhang.
Good evening and good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
So, for the start, I would like to have a few words with Mr. Novakovic first. So, even though Serbia and China became strategic partners way back in 2009, here in Serbia, I have a feeling that the public became aware of Chinese geopolitical presence only when the recent COVID-19 pandemic started, and when we were in first lockdown and China offered much needed help, and now famous mask or vaccine diplomacy began. Could you tell us more about what shape and form does China's soft power projection take in Serbia, and how do these soft power efforts help China in achieving its main goals and protecting its main interests here in the Western Balkans and in Serbia particularly?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, I would not disagree, but I would like to point also that China, the awareness about the presence of China in Serbia, I think it started in 2016 after the visit of the Chinese president to Serbia and subsequent obtaining of Smederevo steel mill. So since then, we have a strong narrative in the Serbian media about Sino-Serbian friendship, and it got only elevated to the higher ground during the COVID-19 pandemics. So basically, when talking about China's soft powers, we should talk also about the things that enable it in Serbia. And there are actually several aspects of it. One is, of course, economic strength and investments in Serbia and loans. Then we should not forget the positive image from the past. Probably the most important, the positive attitude of Serbian government towards China and actually advocacy of its goals here in Serbia, which was to a largest extent manifested during the first weeks of the pandemics, actually in March 2020. And I would also like to remind you that Serbia in this moment has a growing numbers of diaspora students and workers who are in China and who are also acting as enablers for the in one way or the other for the Chinese narrative. But basically, soft power in Serbia, Chinese soft power, works, through three traditional dimensions. First one is being the diplomatic network. Second one, I group them, in one big branch. So language, education, research, and culture. And thirdly, the media, of course. Regarding the diplomatic network, I think that the wolf warrior diplomacy, which is present in Southeastern Asia, this confrontational approach of China vis-a-vis the West, does not really exist in Serbia, actually, until now. Chinese representatives are really careful in their public statements, and also because of the friendly attitude of the government, I think that there is not even a need to have that, because confrontations are happening in between Serbian government and the EU and eventually the US. But China is out, the only element of the wolf warrior diplomacy that we have seen in the region was actually quite recently, a few weeks ago, with Montenegro, when the Chinese embassy for the first time reacted against one statement coming from the US in a quite confrontational way after the visit of Mr. Palmer. But I will just be short, and then we can continue regarding the other branches of the soft power influence. Regarding the diplomatic network, one should also remember that China is about to finish the construction of the biggest cultural center in the Southeastern Europe, here in Belgrade. And many wonder what is the purpose of such a huge space, but we shall see when it opens. Regarding the language, education, research, and culture, I mean, my colleagues in the media mentioned this many times. We have two Confucius institutes, one in Belgrade University since 2006, and now one in Novi Sad. We have Chinese language courses in 14 primary and elementary schools. There are also summer camps and exchanges of students between Serbia and China. Also, there is a cooperation between three Serbian universities from Niš, Niš, Belgrade, and Novi Sad, with the University Jiao Tong since December 2008. Some private universities, which are quite close to certain members of the current government, like Megatrend University, have a Chinese center which cooperates with Confucius Center, and then there are also there is also cooperation of private companies with educational Chinese companies with the educational institutions in Serbia, in particular, for example, University of Kragujevac and University of Novi Sad with Linglong Company. Also, there are scholarships for Serbian students. There is an ongoing cooperation of Chinese institutes with the Institute of International Politics and Economics. It's a state-owned institute, and we just 7 days ago, for example, had a symposium on the anniversary of the Belt and Road. And regarding culture, we have this, we have the spread of celebration of the Chinese New Year's and festivals of light in Belgrade, in Novi Sad, but also in some other towns. Regarding the media, this is a tricky part, and it is also connected with the positive attitude of the government towards cooperation with China. Because, I mean, first I will mention just few outright Chinese media, like a website from Bosnia and Herzegovina in Serbian language, Kina Danas, China Today, then a monthly edition to Belgrade Weekly Nedeljnik, also called Kina Danas, then Politika's, the website of one of the most important Belgrade dailies, Politika, has a section on China. We have presence of Chinese international radio, etc. And also we have a promotion of Chinese culture on RTS. But what is important is that China is also widely promoted, in particular by the tabloids, which are, some of our colleagues say that they are quite close to the government. and we have seen just at the beginning of pandemics that one of these tabloids, Informer, has rented a number of billboards with a huge image of Chinese president and the statement, "Thank you, brother C," for obviously this was a thanks for the help at the beginning of pandemics and later providing of the vaccines. But also what is interesting in all of this, when we are mentioning Chinese soft power, it seems that China is and Chinese institutions are really willing only to cooperate with institutions, media, and others that have a direct link with the state. In other words, what we do not have is the cooperation with institutions or the media which are not related to the state apart of Nedeljnik weekly, which has this edition. And also I think that one of our colleagues from Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence, Mr. Stefan Vladisavljev, has recently mentioned that there are information coming from the journalists from the independent media who say that they never get statements from the Chinese officials or Chinese embassy, and that this is all reserved for the state media or the media in connection with the state. And I will stop here, and then we can. And
that would be enough for the introduction. Thank you, Mr. Novakovic. We'll move to Mr. Zeng. Mr. Zeng, probably there is no country on earth that has more experience in dealing with China and CCP's disinformation campaign and propaganda campaign ever since both Taiwan Strait crisis. China and PLA not only shelled Taiwan cities with bombs and projectiles, but also with pamphlets calling Taiwanese people, "Hey, we have our color TVs, everything is great in Red China, come join us, come visit us." And even during the first democratic elections in Taiwan in 1996, PLA and its navy were threatening and trying to intimidate the Taiwanese people from voting, from expressing their opinions on the ballot. So China and CCP was always present in Taiwan, but with the development of modern technologies and most notably social media, and now during COVID pandemics, it seems like some doors that were closed before are now swung wide open. Beijing even now seems somehow even more relentless in its attitude towards Taiwan. Do you think that's correct?
And let me put it this way. CCP thinks that China and Taiwan share common history and a common culture, particularly a common language, so that they can initiate their so-called soft power or propaganda, or in the past is united front work. But after the democratization in Taiwan, we are now fully democratized, become a consolidated democracy. That then CCP is really unaware of the current state of Taiwan's democracy. So the content of its soft power or propaganda, or even worse, disinformation campaign, doesn't really work very well if they insist on creating or generating the content of the disinformation by themselves, either by their Department of United Front Work or Department of External Propaganda, or their Department or Ministry of State Security, or PLA propaganda organs. None of that works until last year in 2020. Also because of the enabling effect of the COVID-19 crisis. So yes, in the past, they would initiate the propaganda or more nuanced, covert, and sometimes and not sometimes, usually going together with corruption in ways that try to bribe some local media or politicians or local civil society groups, taking them on a tour or trip to China. That doesn't mean those people will change their mind. Why I'm sure that their previous propaganda or soft power approach doesn't work is that there's hard evidence by the January 2020 vote, our presidential vote, that local voters doesn't really support some more not so hostile, those who stands not so hostile to China. I'm not trying to finger pointing anything or anyone, but it's a hard evidence that China also realized, well, what the hell? All the efforts of our disinformation, even though they goes online through social media, doesn't work. Let me point out that the beauty of a democracy. First of all, of course, CCP doesn't know a thing about democracy. So their disinformation wouldn't work. Second of all, if you have divided society, almost every democracy around the globe will become divided, sometimes even go polarized. Polarized is not a good thing. It will enable the disinformation campaign, but appropriate degree of dividedness will help stop the spread of disinformation, because you have echo chamber effect. So each side of people will choose what they pick to believe. As long as you have a whole of society approach to counter disinformation, the government alone wouldn't work, because the whole point of disinformation campaign, also named as influence campaign or cognitive operations, is try to change people's mind, try to influence what's between your ears, your brain, how your brain works. Meaning they try to undermine your trust towards the democratic system. So by China's approach, they will try to mobilize pro-China segment. That's for sure. They will have some local collaborator. Although I usually wouldn't name those as so-called China CCP collaborators. They just speak in a similar way to China's CCP's propaganda. And so there's no hard evidence. So I'm not pointing my finger to anybody. But China would take every opportunity to undermine people's trust towards democratic government in Taiwan. Either it's so we have two major camps, so-called the green camp, the current government, or the blue camp, the opposition camp. But either way, either party in office, in power, trust me, the CCP will still try every effort to undermine, because the ultimate goal is to undermine, to disrupt people's trust towards the government. So it's a golden opportunity, golden window of opportunity for the CCP to take the best use of the COVID-19 crisis. Unfortunately for CCP, the Taiwan's pandemic status is most of the time is under control. So until this mid-May this year, that we have the outbreak or more, although from the perspective of other countries, our situation is fine, but compared to previous state, people in Taiwan are concerned, particularly regarding the shortage of the vaccine. Also, well, let you know, I'm glad to let you know I just got vaccinated yesterday. So I have pain in not only in the neck, the whole body.
That's good to hear.
But Chinese will, this time it's a kind of different. Since last year, they have changed their ways. They have used the hybrid approach. I think maybe you guys are already familiar with the fact that Chinese PLA, their military jet fighters harass Taiwan almost every day on a daily basis. And they will take the physical, the actual activities in the physical space with the combination of disinformation in the virtual space. Now, this is one thing. They will also use their proxy website, so-called South China Sea Probe Initiative, affiliated under the Beijing University, to broadcast some fake news. This is because they know the effect of this disinformation will be enabled by their physical harassment or some deterrence. And also they will copy after Russia. What Russians have done in 2016 to the U.S. Democratic campaign headquarters and to French Macron campaign. They hacked in the campaign headquarters, hacking the email system and store the email and twisted the content and spread out. CCP, or more specifically, the Ministry of State Security, as what I have heard, I'm not saying for sure. Again, I will never point my finger to any specific agency, but CCP or China's hackers hack into our presidential office and got the stuff twisted and spread out to reporters last May, before the inauguration of President Taiwan. And then they also hacked into our critical infrastructure, something similar to the colonial pipeline incident. And so that's the two kind of early warning sign and some kind of deterrent warning, saying, because once you hack and expose your track, and that is a signal, you deliver a signal that I will go back anytime I want. So that's we take that very seriously, and that's the first time we sense that they have tried a new way, a new more not nuanced, but totally not nuanced at all, but a very brutal but hybrid approach. Back to the physical space, as you mentioned, Taiwanese fruit like pineapple or our banana used to export to China, but China exerts some coercive trade measures, just like what they have done to Australia. And
same it was with tourism and tourists. Same it was with the tourists from Taiwan. They put some sanctions and tried to curb down and destroy a Taiwanese tourist sector.
Exactly, exactly. And the sections, that is the way they try to coerce importers or exporters. But right now you can see that they also try to coerce a technology platform in Hong Kong, and they try to coerce like Tesla and the self-driving car manufacturer Tesla. They use the excuse of National Cybersecurity Laws or National Cybersecurity Act, saying you should localize all the data you collected inside China. Otherwise, there's a national security risk. Although you may kind of saying, well, they are trying to counterbalance or try to punish what the U.S. has done to them, like Huawei. Yeah, the U.S. used the same measures, some reasons towards not only Huawei, also to TikTok.
Yes, exactly.
But China this time they use a more again a very brutal way. You guys mentioned Southeast Asia countries. They are in urgent need of Chinese vaccines, particularly Malaysia or Indonesia. Those two countries have kept a close and friendly relationship with China. But this May, China's military cargo plane have a lot of 6 or 7 or 13, I forget, but never this many before has approached very close to the airspace of Malaysia, and which really pissed off Malaysian government. But our expert have analyzed that it's because Malaysia tried to collaborate with Vietnam to have some maritime pact to counter China's gray zone activities in South China Sea. So as you can tell, if they want to, if CCP try to build up a good relationship with a specific country or government, they will initiate soft power diplomacy through media, and they will provide a lot of free content through CCTV in your language or in English, in any language tailored to a specific country. Why not? Why buy milk when you have a cow for free? So anybody would be happy. But once you piss China off with some activities which is hostile in their from their perspective, maybe like this event, they would
We'll see later.
But again, I'm not pointing anybody, but they will change their face. You know, in China's Chinese opera, there's so-called Beijing opera. There's face changing trick, and they will quickly shift into the hawkish or harsh approach. But that's not the normal state of the diplomacy. Let me point out that 10 years before, or 22 decades earlier, their diplomacy are all wolf warrior diplomacy, but they quickly change into very soft way.
We will talk more later about face changing and wolf warrior diplomacy, as you said. I will return to Mr. Novakovic for now. Mr. Zhang mentioned cognitive warfare, or China's trying to influence cognitive thinking in particular parties. In Taiwan, Beijing is hoping to diminish the opposition to the potential CCP takeover of Taiwan. Do you think there is a similar type of goal or similar type of cognitive warfare in Serbia, where the ultimate goal is perhaps to protect Chinese capitals, so-called corrosive capital, as you called it in one of your guesting? Or is there maybe a will to promote a Chinese economic model to Serbian citizens, to simply say, hey, economic development is possible without these tricky things like democracy and human rights? You're muted, Igor.
Sorry, I forgot. To me, I mean, I cannot escape the feeling that from the very beginning, Chinese did not have some sort of a grand plan for Serbia or this region. I mean, for them, of course, it's obvious we are along the BRI track. I mean, we are important region as a whole for China, for Belt and Road. But in total, and precisely because we are part of Europe and we are in the immediate neighborhood of the EU, they were much more careful in promoting their own models, in promoting different narratives, etc. What is happening in Serbia that we actually have the ruling elite, which is very interested in cooperation with China. And that is the differentia specifica in comparison with some other states. What we have seen in the past 2 or 3 years is that the government and the highest officials, like the president, are the ones who are actually defending China against the criticisms. We had that at the beginning of pandemics. We had that during this massive air pollution at the beginning of February or end of January 2020. And we had that also when criticisms came roughly around this time regarding the privatization process of RTB smelting and mining concern and the involvement of Zijin in this town. So what I'm trying to say is actually that all of these operations, I mean, Chinese are aware of it. They are pushing their own narratives, but much of it is, thanks to the openness, I would say, of our ruling elite and openness of the media for their influence. And that is the key. So whatever we have in the media, many of these narratives are reproduced by some of our media. We have that similar situation when it comes to Russia for a number of years now. But I think that Chinese star is growing and Russian star is slowly waning. But in essence, the model is the same. How out of these media that are under direct Chinese control or influence, I mean, the content that you can find there is quite ambiguous. I mean, for example, that edition in Nedeljnik, I personally really like it. But, it's somehow detached from the actual political and economic situation in the country. It's detached from the political narrative. It's about the history of China, proverbs, etc. It's nothing concrete there. And then when you go to tabloids, you can see what is the Chinese opinion regarding regarding the vaccines from the West, regarding the origin of the virus, regarding everything. So in my mind, their activities are to a large extent enhanced by the domestic media. And what we have on the ground is this, creation of likability of China here. And just one more thing, and I will stop. Just recently, I had a chance to look on one opinion poll, which is unfortunately close to public. I mean, it was it was about measuring of the soft power influence of different states, and it turns out that actually citizens see China as an important country. They see it as a superpower. They see it as a place with which Serbia should develop ties. And of course, I think that is the attitude of the many citizens in this even wider region. But the problem is when it comes to the attractiveness, cultural closeness, receptiveness of Chinese products. I mean, we're far apart. Citizens of Serbia are much more inclined towards the EU in particular, and then on the second place is Russia, and China is somewhere way behind as a important country, but really unknown to Serbian Serbs.
You mentioned Russia a couple of times. We've seen that these two revisionist great power, they share some interest, and they are in so-called strategic partnership of need. They are both aligned against the West and similar. But in this space, Russia's soft power and Russia propaganda was the long king for many decades. So do you think even if there was some cooperation between Russian and Chinese propaganda, mainly regarding Western vaccines, its effectiveness, is it possible that Russia and China might step on each other's toes here in Serbia?
No, to be honest, I don't see that Chinese and Russian influence here in Serbia overlap. I mean, they could be even radically different because for Russia, the Western Balkans is a sort of playing ground. It's not its sphere of influence, but they observe it as a good playing ground for putting pebbles in the shoe of the West. On the other hand, for China, there is some real strategic plan for the region, although it's still in development, but it's different than the one of Russia. And China, of course, could be really interested, for example, to see the integration of Serbia and the region into the EU, while for Russia that has no importance right now. So in the future, I would even I would not be surprised if these there would be a clash. But just one really interesting thing. If you remember, I mean, for the domestic public here, at the beginning of pandemics, our government officials were really promoting China. And what we have seen, in the media, especially tabloids, but also some other, we had, high-level reporting about the Chinese visits, Chinese help, cooperation with China when it comes to COVID-19. Russians, I had an impression, because we also got the help from Russia, that they came only after the pressure coming here from domestic public. So Chinese are helping, where are Russians? So they came, but there, they were not followed in the media at the same level as Chinese did. So basically, what we could hear, yes, they're disinfecting certain towns. There are some activities, but let's hear more about China. So what I'm trying to say, that already there was, a sort of measuring of partnerships by our government during the pandemics.
Oh, okay. Mr. Zhang, you mentioned that Taiwan is, we can say, successfully defending so far against the Chinese propaganda. We saw in the 2020 elections, even though I read numerous fake news about current President Tsai Ing-wen, that she has a fake doctorate, that she was catching COVID almost every second day, that the Taiwanese government is vaccinating its elites, but there are no enough vaccines for the middle class and for the working people. And at the end, she won in the landslide victory. So DPP continues to progress Taiwan on this democratic road. So I found it specifically interesting what you mentioned, the whole of society approach, where specifically a civil element, I mean civil society, is included in fighting these fake news. I especially like MyGoPen and similar Taiwanese fact checkers, and the speed and the urgency they publish and discover fake news, keeping educated citizenry, keep everyone basically fighting at the same time coronavirus and fighting this other virus of the disinformation campaign. What could Serbia, as we've seen, our government is a bit more pro-Chinese, but what could the non-government sector, what could civil society do to fight this cognitive warfare?
Well, you just mentioned a very good point, that the spread of pandemic is just like the spread of disinformation. So how do you get your citizens immune from the virus? Well, it's impossible to have 100% immune, because the virus will evolve into new virus. So we are not saying that our citizens are getting used to decades of the united front work so that we are immune, so that their CCP disinformation campaign doesn't work. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that we have our government work together with the fact-check agencies in civil society, and working together with social media enterprises platform. Like usually Taiwanese people love to use Facebook and Line, something like Twitter. So that's our two favorites. Myself also use Line and Facebook. So we work with their representatives, technology representative, and PR people to solve the problem. Well, let me make it very clear that our government would never intervene to impose a restriction of the freedom of expression or freedom of your opinions online or offline. So it's based on the self-disciplines and the pushing forces from our civil societies groups. Those fact check, like you have ADN Balkan Alliance, and you have Instanom in Serbia, something like that. That will work if the multi-stakeholder will collaborate and exchange information simultaneously. And exchange have a small talk all the times. So they can exchange how to verify or correct those fake news. But what's most important, particularly in a divided society, is that the government agency, once you spotted those fake news related or relevant to your function, your functionality, then in Taiwan, we will respond with correct source within 24 hours. That's the golden window of opportunity to stop the spread of disinformation. But let me further point out that that doesn't mean people will totally trust a government source. Some segment of people just don't buy it, but that's all right. As long as you provide a correct information, that will create a diversion to the original disinformation impact. That's the key point. That's something that the CCP will never get. The beauty of the divided society. And I also want to echo what Igor has just said, that CCP love and still stick to a very old school way to use the newspaper advertisement, either in the US election, try to influence the US campaign. That doesn't work. That didn't work. Or they will use the Chinese Mandarin newspaper in Chinatown to influence overseas Chinese, or they would take use of the diaspora to try to create or generate the disinformation content. But still, there will be some gap between the overseas community and the Taiwanese democratic society. So that still doesn't work, but they have made a lot of progress in these 2 years. I'll stop here.
So I would like to ask you, you mentioned first propaganda started on Facebook, and then it's basically a game of whack-a-mole. Propaganda appears and government tries to smash it. They first appeared on Facebook, then moved, as you say, online, and they're trying to publish fake news, presenting themselves as left-leaning newspaper like Liberty Times or Hong Kong Apple News and similar stuff. Do you think China's soft power will keep evolving with the time, or do you think this particular year with the peak of the COVID pandemic and simply there is a fertile ground to spreading fake news and propaganda? Do you think this is the peak of the Chinese propaganda power? Because next year we both know is very important for the CCP. This year was too. It was 100 years of the celebrations, and we saw in the speech of the president Xi Jinping that Taiwan was one of the main talking points. And the next year there is a famous 20-party Congress where President Xi will certainly de facto become an emperor of China, because he will probably get into the third presidential mandate. Do you think the worst is behind Taiwan, or the Taiwan is becoming the brightest flashpoint in the international relationship?
Taiwan will stay as a peace enabler in the region, wouldn't by itself initiate or trigger any conflict unless Taiwan is invaded by adversary forces. But let me point out that propaganda, probably you are right in some way that propaganda power is at its highest point, its peak, but also in its lowest point, because it's now going more and more hawkish, which reflect, if you look at the history, look back in the history of the CCP, every time it's hawkish diplomatically, usually it will have a very tense internal conflicts inside Beijing. So right now, after in the early stage of the COVID-19, they began to use the wolf warrior diplomacy. But now they try to re-examine this tentative state and say, well, wait a minute, it's a kind of internalization of our grand external propaganda. That's not the right direction. We should change shift the corner, turn the corner around. So that, by our viewpoint, is that, which means Xi Jinping has seized a very firm control of his power in Beijing, so that he would lose the tight grip over propaganda a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. I will ask Mr. Novakovic quickly before we move to a couple of questions from the audience. Overall, do you think that China's soft power efforts yielded good results? We've seen a green movement slowly appearing in Serbia regarding to the Xi Jinping situations and massive investments of the Chinese money basically pouring into Serbia, copper and coal industry. And first researchers showed that the Serbian people believed that China was the sole contributor and savior of Serbia in the COVID-19 pandemic. But these days, I read those opinions are slightly now balanced. People realize that the COVAX, EU, vaccines coming for the West helped the situation immensely. So, what do you think? Is China's soft power slowly going to fade away? And what does the future hold for China and Serbia? Can Serbia stay close to the fire, but not too close to burn itself?
Well, it depends. I mean, first and foremost, yes, I think that you're quite right that the effects of the COVID-19 pandemics are fading away from China, and also that people are more, especially the green movements, are more and more aware of the things that are happening on terrain. So it's not just enough to save certain factory like Smederevo steel mill or Zijin copper bore. It's now also about, do you respect the domestic framework? And people are aware of that. So it's growing. The thing here is, I mean that Chinese are quite adaptable, and they adapt to the local rules of the game. I mean, certain EU countries also have pretty significant inflow of Chinese money, but then again, the money there is being used in accordance with the domestic legal framework. What we do not have here, I mean, actually, even here is applied in accordance with the domestic legal framework, but the problem is that our framework is weak. And then, in negotiations, many aspects, are practically given to Chinese. So that is the problem. With the right kind of communication, of course, and with firm strategic orientation towards the West, I do not have a doubt that we could still have close relationship with China, but probably we will not have these negatives. These negative effects that we currently have, because I mean Chinese leadership in the past was respecting the orientation, the attitude, legal frameworks if the countries were serious about it. And here we are actually, I think that our political elites are interested in communication with China because I mean first of all they get easy money with quick results, especially when it comes to infrastructure projects. But then also they have attention that usually they do not get, when it comes to the West. And I don't have a doubt that, that is a bit of flattering, etc. So in essence, I think everything depends mostly on us. What do we want to achieve and our political elites? But since we are in this limbo called, from one side the problem of Kosovo, from the other side, no sense of where do we want to go, and also no real options apart from the EU. And there you have it, So it's a fertile ground for the Chinese involvement here in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Novakovic. I think we have a couple of minutes for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So if anyone wants to ask Mr. Novakovic or Mr. Tseng any questions regarding today's topic, please do so. Dimitrije, do we have some questions? I don't see here.
I don't see 2. Maybe you can, Dragoslav, ask another.
So we have some questions from Twitter. I will read some of them. There is questions from Daniela for Mr. Tseng. Let me just quickly translating because it's in Serbian. Oh, okay. She basically asks with recent development, we saw Japanese standing firmly behind Taiwanese regarding the potential invasions. South Korea developing its first aircraft carrier, and Taiwan and President Tsai had a great relationship with Donald Trump, but also with the current USA President Joe Biden. So, do you think that this forming bloc and backslash against the more aggressive China is driving CCP a bit nervous? It's making it's frustrating to be so unsuccessful on so many levels to penetrate Taiwanese society. And could it lead to some sudden, quick, rash decisions?
Well, Taiwan's government, not just military, but the government take a whole of government approach, and right now moved from whole of government approach to a whole of society, meaning we are improving our reserve and the mobilization system to prepare for the worst case scenario, which is China try to create and establish some fate company, some quick and prompt attack, and seize and or overturn our command and control. That is, I'm also the director of the division, not only for cybersecurity, but also for division making simulation, which meaning war gaming. So it is always in our part of our war game that PLA or China will take advantage of some sudden take use of the element of surprise. But back to the first part of the question is that, of course, China will get more nervous for the emerging quasi-alliance or with Taiwan plug in the so-called Quad, quadrilateral security dialogue in Indo-Pacific. But let me be very clear that Taiwan's military or Taiwan's war game wouldn't expect that Taiwan will rely on any external aid, military aid or something else or something beyond that. Our war games, we always prepare for the worst case scenario and fight on our own. So we will keep on consolidating and modernizing our military capabilities. But rest assured, capabilities alone, our intent, strategic intent, or our goal is never anything like offensive. It's purely defensive, including cybersecurity in cyberspace. We have the capabilities to initiate offensive cyber warfare, but we choose not to do that. Not because that we are under tens of millions of cyber attacks on a monthly basis. Not just that. It's just because that we will keep our promise to be a stabilizer in the regional security, peace and security.
Thank you, Mr. Tang. Well, I think we are ending right on time, and I think we covered pretty much every aspect of today's topic. I want to thank you both, Mr. Novakovic and Mr. Tang, for joining us today and sharing their vast knowledge with us. And I will return the word back to Dimitrije. You're muted, Dimitrije.
Sorry. Thank you, Dragoslav, and many thanks to our fellow speakers that really explain what's happening in two really different parts of the world and in two different contexts in relation to Chinese Communist Party. I hope that we will make a few more events in this form about the similar topic, and I'm sure that that we can count on you again in some other form, maybe in some live form. When I say live, I think indoors, so here in Serbia and Belgrade. So I hope that we will continue our cooperation in the future. Thank you very much, and many thanks to the participants that choose to spend their time with us during the summer break. Thank you very much, and see you soon on another online event with Novi Treći Put and our partners.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.